Hendrick Motorsports is expected to receive penalties for messing with the Lubers, and Denny, Hamlin admits he intentionally ran into Ross Chastain at Phoenix. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got a ton of Nascar and other motorsports stories to discuss here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to start about talking about Daniel Suarez. As Adam Stern reported yesterday, Daniel Suarez is being used to help promote the new Chevy Blazer. This is really cool to see Daniel Suarez is getting involved with General Motors. Chevy's a big fan of Daniel Suarez nowadays, so I think this is really cool. They're helping him promote the Chevy Blazer. Really exciting stuff. Very happy about that, and glad to see that he is being helped to be promoting that. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the IMS Hall of Fame class for 2023. As this year's Hall of Fame class consists of two people, Tim Cindric, who's currently the president of Team Penske. He's helped Team Penske have a lot of success over the last 20-plus years. And Tony George, who's been president of IMS for a very long time, is also getting inducted into this year's IMS Hall of Fame class as well. Congratulations to both getting inducted into the Hall of Fame class for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. They both absolutely deserve it. They won a lot of things, and I think it's overall really exciting to see that both of them have been inducted. So congratulations to both of them, and they completely deserve it, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Drake. As Adam Stern tweeted this out on Monday morning or Monday afternoon, that Drake was spotted wearing NASCAR vintage jackets with Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s name on the back of it. I think it's really cool to see that all these celebrities, seems like it's really cool nowadays, especially recently, it's kind of recent trend it's picked up, where we have a lot of these big celebrities wearing vintage NASCAR jackets. I think it's, first of all, really awesome to see that Drake is doing this, but what I would love to see is more of like modern vintage jackets with drivers like names like Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, Kyle Busch, Joey Logano, Kevin Harvick, you name it. I would love for those drivers to be on the back of vintage jackets as well. I think that'd be really cool and get a modern take on that. I think it's really cool to have celebrities like Drake wearing vintage jackets. I think it's overall really awesome and very happy that he was able to do that. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about D.L. Wilson. As it's been reported by multiple reporters that on, I believe a couple days ago, D.L. Wilson had left the hospital, I believe a couple days ago. This is really exciting stuff and really happy to see D.L. Wilson has been released from the hospital. First thing, I want to wish D.L. Wilson a speedy recovery as he continues to recover from his injuries. It's unclear if he'll be racing anytime soon in the number 12 car, but I wish him the best of luck and wish him a speedy recovery. He was involved in a very scary wreck at Phoenix, got involved in one of the wrecks, kind of got out of the car gingerly, had a couple injuries, and now he'll basically be trying to recover so he can get back in the vehicles. Well, granted, he's going to have a little bit of time to rest now, but hopefully we'll see D.L. Wilson back behind the wheel of a race car, and I'm wishing him a well and speedy recovery. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Lenovo. As Lenovo is going to be sponsoring Kyle Busch for the first time this season this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway. We knew that Lenovo was going to be sponsoring Kyle Busch, so this is not really a new sponsor for Kyle Busch, but we didn't know how many races that they're going to be sponsoring KFB. The last time Lenovo sponsored a driver, which of course is Tyler Reddick, they went on to win the race. So maybe, just maybe, that Lenovo magic could come in for Kyle Busch, and Kyle Busch can go on and get his second victory and be officially safe and locked into the playoffs. I think it is awesome that Lenovo is coming in to sponsor Kyle Busch this weekend. I think it's very exciting stuff overall, and happy to see Lenovo is going to sponsor Kyle Busch this weekend in Atlanta and for a couple other races this season as well. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Hailie Deegan. As Hailie Deegan might have a new sponsor for this weekend, as she teased, and basically on the entrance it says TBA, and basically she teased on her Instagram story on Monday that she might have a new sponsor and a new truck. Now, some people do believe it's Odessa Battery, which could possibly be a possibility, considering Odessa Battery has sponsored her in the last couple of years. But it also could be a new sponsor that's coming into play to sponsor. If that's the case, I think that'd be really exciting and really cool. But if it's also Odessa Battery, it's awesome those companies are still willing to work with her. Overall, it's really exciting stuff that she might have a new sponsor. We'll have to wait and see if she officially does end up having a new sponsor very soon. Hopefully she maybe does. We'll have to wait and see. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Haas Automation. As it was reported by PBS and Adam Stern yesterday, the Haas Automation is being accused of violating sanctions and doing business with Russia. That's a little bit of an issue right there because Haas Automation is currently run by Gene Haas. Now, Gene Haas apparently has gone to prison in the past, I think one time, so if he does go to prison, this would not be the first time. He's already been in prison in the past. But this ends up being true in the case. This has a major effect on a lot of things, including Stewart-Haas Racing, which could have a big effect on the team. Sponsors might not be willing to work with them as much. We obviously know that Busch might be leaving Stewart-Haas Racing at the end of this year and going to work with another organization like Trackhouse, or maybe even Kyle Busch. That could be a possibility at the end of this year. But this is a story that we're going to have to continue following as time goes on because this could affect Stewart-Haas Racing long term. And we also know that Tony Stewart's had some interest basically getting out of NASCAR completely over the last year. So this could basically be the death because it seems like Stewart-Haas Racing is falling from grace, and this seems like a new chapter in that era of falling from grace from Stewart-Haas Racing. It may not affect the team at all, but this is a story to keep an eye on for sure, and this could have a big effect on Stewart-Haas Racing overall. We'll have to wait and see what happens. If it does end up having a big effect on him overall, we'll have to wait and see what happens. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Austrian Grand Prix. As F1 announced earlier this morning that the Austrian Grand Prix is going to be staying on the Formula 1 schedule at least through the 2027 season. The Austrian Grand Prix has been around for many, many years. Of course, it's Max Verstappen's home country. Max Verstappen, of course, has won there as well once or twice, if I'm not mistaken, and he'll be looking to get another win this year and try to win for the next 5 years at this racetrack. So I think they had a contract through this year or 2024, so now they're extended at least for the next few years. It's really good, though, to see that they are continuing to stay on the F1 schedule. You want companies like this, you want racetracks like this to stay on the schedule long term. And overall, I am very happy to see that they will be staying on the F1 schedule, at least for the foreseeable future. Really happy, good stuff for sure, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Keith McGee. As it was announced yesterday that Keith McGee is going to drive the 34th for Raymond Brothers Racing this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway, making his season debut in the Truck Series. Keith McGee has made select starts in the Truck Series in the past, albeit his select starts have not been very, very good with the team. But again, he's not driven for really fast organizations, so you can't really gauge how talented he is. Plus, it is a super speedway track, so you can't really have too high of expectations. So I think everyone's kind of on an equal playing field. But plus, no one's going home, I believe, in the Truck Series field, so everyone should be able to make it. So he'll be able to help that 34 truck team get some pretty big points. Good to see he's back behind the wheel, and we'll see what he does this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Caesar Baccarella. As it was announced on Monday, Caesar Baccarella is going to drive the 66 for MBM Motorsports this weekend at Atlanta. This car, though, will have Alpha Prime Racing partnership. Now, why is Caesar Baccarella driving the 66 car? Well, he initially was supposed to drive the 42 car, and Alpha Prime was supposed to bring 4 cars to the Atlanta weekend. However, due to potential rain in the forecast, they wanted to make sure that they got the 66 out there and partnered with MBM so that Caesar could have an opportunity to race this weekend. And I think that they've got a better chance of racing this weekend now than they would have had if they ended up driving for the other organization. That being said, though, I am excited to see Caesar's going to drive for MBM. They're going to have Alpha Prime Racing back, and so this should be the best MBM has performed in a while, and I'm glad to see that MBM has brought Caesar Baccarella on as a partner, and glad to see he'll be joining for the team for this weekend at Atlanta. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Chad Chastain. As it was announced on Monday that Chad Chastain will make his NASCAR Xfinity Series debut this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway, driving the 91 car for DGM Racing. Chad Chastain is the younger brother of Ross Chastain, who currently, of course, drives the #1 for Trackhouse Racing in the NASCAR Cup Series. And, of course, it makes a lot of sense because we've seen Ross Chastain drive for DGM Racing in the past as well. Now, Chad Chastain, I think, is a pretty decent driver. He's not as good as his brother Ross, but Chad Chastain doesn't have a lot of as much experience as Ross does, so it makes a lot of sense why Chad isn't as good as his brother Ross. That being said, though, this is a great opportunity for Chad to get an opportunity to race. I think everyone should be able to make the field. I don't think anyone's going home for the Xfinity Series race. I could be wrong on that, but I'm glad to see that Chad Chastain is getting the opportunity, and we'll see what he does this weekend at Atlanta in the 91 car. Maybe he impresses, maybe he steals a win, but I don't think that's going to happen this weekend, to be honest. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Bailey Currey. As it was announced on Monday that Bailey Currey is going to drive the 41 for Nice Motorsports this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Now we're going to get in Garrett Smith. We're going to talk about Bailey Currey here in just a little bit later in this episode, but this is a really good opportunity for Bailey. Bailey, in my opinion, is a very underrated driver who always gets the best out of his equipment, and I think he'll do a very solid job this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway in that number 41 truck. I'm not expecting him to win, though we've seen the 41 truck show winning speed in the past, especially with Ross Chastain. But Bailey Currey is a driver I think that could tend for a top 10, and I think he could do a very solid job this weekend. Overall, though, I'm very excited to see that he's getting the opportunity once again. I think he'll do a very, very good job with Nice Motorsports, and I'm looking forward to see that he'll be back behind the wheel of the Nice Motorsports team. And his truck, not to mention, also looks really, really great in my opinion. Excited to see that Bailey Currey is driving for Nice Motorsports this weekend. Really exciting stuff for sure. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Garrett Smithley. As there's been a little bit of situation happen at JD Motorsports over there, as Bailey Currey is no longer driving for JD Motorsports. The person I'll be replacing for the rest of the season is Garrett Smithley, who will drive the 4 car for the remainder of the 2023 season with JD Motorsports. Now, I apparently do not know what happened with them, though I do know a little bit about what happened. Apparently, there might have been a fallout. I'm not entirely sure, but there might have been a fallout with the situation with that team, unfortunately. And I don't know what went on, considering Bailey Currey had a lot of success with JD Motorsports. And them not even mentioning him in the press release with Garrett Smithley coming on to drive the 4 car. That's a little bit suspicious, in my opinion, and something probably did end up happening, but we're not entirely sure exactly what happened. I'm going to say this, though, about Garrett Smithley coming into the 4 car. Garrett's a decent driver. Not the greatest driver in the world, but he's a decent driver. But it's a shame that Bailey Currey is no longer driving because he's gotten the best out of that equipment when he's driven for JD Motorsports. And it just seems like that team can't keep their talented drivers around generally. No disrespect to Garrett Smithley, but I think Bailey Currey is a way better driver than Garrett Smithley. It's just really unfortunate what ended up happening, and I'm glad that Garrett's getting the opportunity to drive full-time. I know there's been some issues with him getting in the field this year with BJ McLeod Motorsports in the Xfinity Series. It's just been a mess over there. And it is what it is. I am happy that he's getting the opportunity. It's just a shame it's got to be expensive of Bailey Currey. I hope Bailey gets an opportunity to drive some more wear in the Xfinity Series going forward because I think he deserves an opportunity to be driving in the Xfinity Series in select races. He definitely deserves an opportunity either to be full-time or driving select races. In my honest opinion, he really deserves an opportunity with a really, really good team. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about the Chicago Street Course. As Adam Stern reported on Monday that Chicago is expected to have about 50,000 people per day to attend the July event. And it's not projecting to turn a profit in the first year of the race after investing $50 million to set it up. That is a lot of money. I didn't know how much money they were putting in the Chicago Street Course, but the fact that they're raising $50 million to set up this event is absolutely insane. And that could be used for different types of tracks, like short tracks and reinventing and innovating into other different tracks. But I understand why they're trying to focus on the Chicago Street Course race. It does make a lot of sense. Now, the big question is, they're probably in general going to be losing a profit because remember, there's a lot of talk about the future of Chicago Street Course. Remember, Lord Lightfoot is no longer going to be the mayor in Chicago anymore, and there's going to be a new mayor coming in. Brandon Johnson and Paul Vancil, I believe, are the 2 mayoral candidates, and the election is not going to be done until May 15th, so it would be too late for them to cancel the event. So about 2 months from today exactly would be when the mayoral election is done in Chicago. The big thing to think about, though, when it does come to the Chicago Street Course is, while I don't think it's going to get affected this year, I do believe after 2023, I would not be surprised if there's no more races on the Chicago Street Course. Considering the fact, I know they have a 3-year contract, but they, of course, still have to pay NASCAR a bunch of money if they break the contract. But I do believe that there's a very strong possibility that they are going to break that contract, and it's not going to make NASCAR happy, but I at least wanted them to get through first year. As much as I'd rather have Chicago and Road America on the schedule, which would probably be the replacement tracks they would go with, I still don't want this event to get canceled this year. I don't think it's going to get canceled. We're too close to the race at this point. They're doing a lot of promotion. We've already got the lengths of the races announced. We've already got dates announced, and it's, in my opinion, a little bit too late to cancel it this year, but I think after 2023, it's one thing we're going to have to watch and wait and see, because I think there's a very good chance and a very good possibility after this year that it could end up getting canceled. It's one thing to watch, and we'll keep an eye on it going forward. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about the Nashville Fairgrounds. As last night, a big push toward the right direction of getting the Nashville Fairgrounds back on the NASCAR Cup Series schedule and the NASCAR schedule in general took place. The National Fair Board has finally passed the Speedway agreement, the Bristol Speedway agreement. Bristol Motor Speedway will be managing the racetrack. Jerry Cobble's team will be managing the track. They have passed it 3-2. Now, the Metro Council still has to approve it, and they have to still consider it, and they still have to prove it. But this is a major step in the right direction for the National Fairgrounds to get back on the NASCAR schedule. Now, what's going on with the National Fairgrounds, and what would they have to do? There's a lot of renovations that need to be done, and NASCAR and SMI and Jerry Cobble's team have already been making some major plans for this racetrack to return. So, of course, like I said, it does have to get approved by the Metro Council for this track to make its official return to the NASCAR schedule. But in my honest opinion, I think we are generally headed toward a really great in the right direction for this track to make its official return. I think it's just overall some really exciting news. And again, I've been wanting this track to come back. It's a really big short track movement. Obviously, that's not the only track to be coming back here maybe as early as next year, though. I think it's going to take at least till 2025 at the earliest that the race would come back. If, of course, that Metro Council does have to approve it. But if it does get approved by the Metro Council, and I don't know how likely that is, but I do believe it will get approved. But we're headed toward a really great future and a really bright future ahead for Nashville in general and the fairgrounds itself. NASCAR really wants to be closer to the city, and you've got a racetrack that's already built in the city, and even drivers like Chase would rather be at the National Fairgrounds than racing a National Super Speedway. But I do believe that there's a chance that it could affect National Super Speedway because National Super Speedway's contract right now only goes through 2024. Next year is the last year of that 4-year deal. So there's a chance that 2025 could be the first year that we have the National Fairgrounds on the schedule, though we're just going to have to wait and see how long it takes for them to get things renovated. And, of course, this will have to be approved by the Metro Council. We'll have to wait and see what happens, still, but it sounds like we're headed toward a really bright future for the National Fairgrounds, and I'm very happy to see that things are headed toward a great future. It's just overall really exciting stuff, and happy to see this going on with the National Fairgrounds. Very exciting stuff that I got approved last night. I'm very happy about it, and I think most fans should be very happy about it at this point as well. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Phoenix TV ratings from this past weekend. And trust me, the ratings are not very good. So according to Adam Stern, Fox earned a 1.93 rating and 3.4 million viewers for Sunday's NASCAR race at Phoenix. That is down from a 2.33 rating, so a 0.4 rating drop, which is one of the biggest drops we've seen in a long time, and 3.991 million viewers for last year's race. So nearly 4 million people watched it last year. It's down to 3.4 million. That means almost 600,000 less people watch a Cup Series race at Phoenix Raceway. Now, a lot of people are going to be asking, why are the ratings down this much? I think there are 3 major factors why the TV ratings are down this much. Number 1, Chase Elliott not being at the racetrack. I think that's got to be the biggest effect. Because remember, Chase Elliott is currently out at the moment right now. And a lot of fans that are Chase Elliott fans just don't seem as interested in watching NASCAR. So that's reason number 1. Number 2, the TV coverage for Fox. The TV coverage for Fox has generally not been good this year. I will say that that was the best broadcast I've watched this year, but that's not saying much. They still had a lot of mistakes on the Fox broadcast this past weekend at Phoenix. If the Fox broadcast did improve, I think the ratings would have also not been down as much. And finally, I think it's due to less people watching television. There's a lot more things to watch on TV. They had the March Madness selection show going on, and you also had the fact that, again, the HUT has been up. That's one thing to remember, is the HUT has been up, which is a big part of the viewership numbers, but also the overall viewership is down. And I think a lot of people are just also, like I said, tired of the TV coverage. If the TV coverage is better from Fox, I think a lot more people would still be tuning in. It's just a really unfortunate ordeal in this situation. The ratings continue to go down. I know a lot of people say, well, how can we make an excuse for dropping 600,000? I do believe once Chase Elliott does make a return, I still think TV ratings will be down from the previous year. But I think just like the Dale Jr. effect, when Dale Jr. was injured, he was out for a long time, the ratings went down massively. Chase Elliott has a pretty massive fan base. And in my opinion, when you don't have Chase Elliott there, you're going to have less people overall tune in. So in my honest opinion, I think that's what's exactly going on at the moment with the TV ratings. I think that's why less people are tuning into the races currently at the moment, is mainly because of Chase Elliott. It's just frustrating. Ratings are down a little bit, but it is what it is, and overall, hopefully the ratings can go up in the future when Chase Elliott does go ahead and decide to make his return, but he still has to recover from his injuries before he does make his official return back to NASCAR. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the Electric Exhibition Series. Now, there's been a lot of talk about this EV Series, and NASCAR has been talking about the Electric Vehicle Series that they have been trying to do. But they were originally supposed to have racing at the Busch Light Clash earlier this year, an Exhibition Series demonstration, but it never ended up going through, and it did not end up getting approved due to cost. Well, it sounds like there still is a big chance and great possibility that could still end up happening. According to Adam Stern, on Monday, NASCAR remains in talks with Chevy, Toyota, Friday, and Ford on a potential electric vehicle exhibition. And GM Vice President Jim Campbell says the race will provide an opportunity for EV learning on track. The exhibition could happen as soon as 2024, so it could happen as early as next year. Now, like I said, there have been talking they were going to do it as early as this year, the Electric Vehicle Series. It'd be unclear if any other manufacturers be involved or just be Ford, Chevy, and Toyota, because I think one of the goals of this Electric Vehicle Series, along with the next-gen car long-term, is to bring in a new manufacturer. With the Electric Vehicle Series, if it would end up happening, I know a lot of people would say, well, what would it do? Would it basically take away other series? It would just probably be an added-on series for short races. It'd be like 30-minute spurts, because electric vehicles can go for a very, very long time. It's not like gas, you have to charge it electrically with like electric stations and such. And electric vehicles are growing in the United States. Do I love electric vehicles in general? No, I like faster cars, and am not the biggest fan of electric vehicles. I'd rather have normal motors. But a lot of these companies and a lot of these car manufacturers are looking at the long-term future, and they're seeing that the electric vehicles are growing. Whether we like it or not, I think generally in the next 10 to 15 years, NASCAR is going to have to find a way to integrate it into the sport. And they're already talking about having electric components on the future of the NASCAR Cup Series cars that we currently have at the moment by 2025 or 2026, having some sort of hybrid system. They've been talking about that for the last 3 or 4 years. It is one thing that we're going to be keeping our tabs on and our eyes on going forward in the foreseeable future when it comes to that, but it does sound like there's a chance we could be seeing an electric vehicle series. And what it could mean is that there's talk that they might have 1,000 horsepower, which maybe with the hybrid systems that they're talking about putting into the Cup cars, that there could be a way that'd be the way we can get increased horsepower, because NASCAR fans want increased horsepower currently at the moment, and trust me, I miss higher horsepower. Hopefully this could be a big way for higher horsepower to get back into the sport in the future. It's one thing to watch, and we'll see what happens going forward when it comes to the electric vehicle series. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Junior Motorsports, as Junior Motorsports continues to talk about a potential jump up to the Cup Series. Now, Dale Jr. was speaking on the Dale Jr. Down, I believe last week, or basically on Friday, there was an NBC post that got posted by Dustin Law on the Friday Fives that he always does every week. And Dale Jr. is, while he wants to jig his team up the Cup, he says, even if we go up to the Cup Series, he is still hesitant on bringing Josh Berry up to the Cup Series with the team. He wants Josh Berry to be on an established organization and drive for a really good organization or solid organization before he brings him up to his own team. Because Junior Motorsports has continued to talk about potentially making a jump up to the Cup Series here in the next couple years, and could be as early as next year, though they've been talking about that since 2021, and they still haven't made the move. Now, why has Junior Motorsports not made the jump up the Cup? I'll tell you why. It's due to the cost of the charters. Charter prices right now are around $30 million. Now, granted, there's a lot of talk that they could be adding more charters to the NASCAR Cup Series, potentially up to maybe up as many as from 36 going up to around 40 charters altogether, so maybe 4 more charters, which might not cost as much as the other 3, though we could end up being wrong, and we could still see hefty prices for those charters. But Dale Jr. going back and talk about the situation with, Josh Berry. Josh Berry, he wants it to be in a more established organization. Josh Berry has been making some NASCAR Cup Series starts, and I think one of the big reasons why we've seen Josh Berry make NASCAR Cup Series starts is because we all thought maybe if Junior Motorsports was going to make the jump up to Cup, that would be the guy that they would end up going with, which would make a lot of sense if they would go with Josh Berry. Josh Berry is, I think, a very, very talented driver. He's shown his stuff. I know people look at Josh Berry and say, well, he's not done great. But Josh Berry has only had 2 starts in the next-gen car, and he's already scored a top 10 in his second start. And he's learning quicker and quicker. And the more experience that Josh Berry gets in the Cup Series, I think the better he is going to be as a driver in this series. He's really shown his stuff. I think he's done a very, very good and a really great job. And I think he would be a great fit for the Junior Motorsports team. But again, Dale Jr. doesn't completely want him. So what drivers could be considered for the Junior Motorsports team? Obviously, maybe guys in his Xfinity Series team, Justin Allgaier or Brandon Jones could be possibilities. Hell, even Sam Mayer could be a potential possibility, though Sam Mayer is 20 years old, so Sam Mayer is still a younger driver. I think it's going to be one thing that we're going to be watching as time goes on when it comes to this. Sam Mayer's only 19, he turns 20 later this year. Maybe he goes for more established drivers like an Eric Jones. We know that teams apparently want Eric Jones, though Eric Jones does have a multi-year deal with Legacy Motor Club. I would for sure believe that there are teams that would love to have Eric Jones on their organizations respectively. So it's going to be one thing to watch for sure as we get closer to it to see if Junior Motorsports does make the jump up the Cup. But it sounds like right now at this particular moment that Josh Berry is a driver they're not completely considering, and it's not due to him not being talented. It's due to him basically that they are waiting on potentially a charter coming their way, and they want to wait for a charter, and also they'd rather have Josh Berry be on a more established team. A crazy move would be him going to JTG Doherty in his second ride, or maybe Stenhouse going to Stuart Haas Racing and them going over to JTG. We're just going to have to wait and see what happens in regards to that. But it sounds like the Junior Motorsports, they're still wanting to jump up the Cup, and they may want to move Josh Berry to another team and then bring someone else in who has experience to go and help Junior Motorsports make the jump up. So we'll see what happens going forward, but it sounds like Dale Jr. is still somewhat interested in making the jump up the Cup. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Jimmie Johnson. As Jimmie Johnson, there have been talks about Jimmie Johnson running Circuit of the Americas. There have been a roster report coming out that he was going to drive the 84 Circuit of the Americas. Well, it was officially confirmed yesterday that Jimmie Johnson has 2 more races added to his NASCAR Cup Series schedule. Now, Jimmie Johnson already has confirmed the Chicago Street Course, but he has now confirmed that he is going to run at Circuit Americas next week. And he's also going to run the Coca-Cola 600. This means that Jimmie Johnson will have run 4 NASCAR Cup Series races, depending if we get more than 40 entries or not. But this confirms that Jimmie Johnson running the Daytona 500, Circuit Americas, the Coke 600, and also the Chicago Street Course event. He will be sponsored by Club Wyndham. This paint scheme, in my opinion, they're running is just a little bit unfinished. It looks like the Pac-Man scheme. We saw Jarrett Lundberg, a.k.a. the Iceberg, put on Twitter basically the Pac-Man logos, and I think, honestly, that should have been the one they ended up going with. But I really love the fact that Jimmie Johnson is coming back. I think the paint scheme could definitely be better. But I want to say this. I am so excited to see Jimmie Johnson running at COTA in the Coke 600. And that COTA race is becoming a marquee event. It's not as big as I think. It's not as big as the Chicago Street Course event or North Wilkesboro, but it's around where Bristol Dirt is. You're going to have a lot of great talent coming in. Plus, you've got the road course package, which is supposed to help road course racing, and also the fact that there's no stage cautions. That's going to be fun. And he joins a list of elite drivers running this event. You got Jordan Taylor, who's, of course, a legend in the IMSA series. He's driving the 9 for Hendrick Motorsports. You've got Formula One champions Kimi Räikkönen and Jenson Button. Kimi Räikkönen driving the 91 for Project 91, which is a Trackhouse car, and Jenson Button, who's driving the 15 for Rick Ware Racing. And you've also got Connor Daly driving the 50 car for the Money Team, meaning you've got 5 drivers from other forms of racing who've come from the last years from other forms of racing coming into play. Now, what are Jimmie Johnson's chances of making the show? Obviously, there's 39 cars in the field for the COTA race, and there's potentially more that could enter as we get closer to that. We're less than 2 weeks into the race. So, in fact, we're like 9 or 10 days away from that at this particular point. But I think Jimmie Johnson could run very, very good. I'm not expecting Jimmie Johnson to win. I still think drivers like Kyle Larson, Daniel Suarez, and Ross Chastain are probably, and even Jordan Taylor for that matter, are probably going to be major factors who will be going for the overall win in those races. But having Jimmie Johnson back in the series, though, is going to be fun. Now, another thing about the Coke 600 race, this will be the first time that Jimmie Johnson has raced on an intermediate racetrack, because Phoenix is not technically an intermediate track. It's considered like one of the shorter ovals, so that would be one of the reasons. I wonder if he would do like an intermediate oval test for like tracks like Charlotte to get a little bit more experience. That'd be one thing I'd like to wait and see on. But it is exciting to see that Jimmie Johnson is going to be competing in those events. Excited that he's back behind the wheel Hope he can do very, very solid, and I'm looking forward to see that Jimmy Johnson will be competing in the COTA Cup Series race and the Coke 600 Cup Series races. All we're looking forward to that, in my opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next major story in today's episode as we are talking about Denny Hamlin versus Ross Chastain once again. Now, we kind of talk about this on the channel on Monday. We talk about the fact that Denny Hamlin had some contact with Ross Chastain at the end of the Phoenix race. Now, initially, we all thought that that was unintentional, as we all thought, because on the last lap of the race, the final restart, Denny Hamlin and Ross Chastain were on old tires, and Denny Hamlin and Ross Chastain slipped back from about being basically inside the top 10. We're probably going to finish around 15th, more than likely, with their older tires. Get a bunch of guys behind them that were on 4 tires, and they dropped all the way back to 23rd or 24th. We found out that Denny Hamlin and Ross Chastain had some contact, and we all thought it might have been unintentional, and they had a chat after the race. Both Denny Hamlin and Ross Chastain had talked to each other about what happened, and they called it a truce. Now, Denny Hamlin went on his Actions Detrimental podcast on Monday, and he admits that what he did to Ross Chastain was completely intentional. He said he saw Ross Chastain next to him. He knew that he was on old tires, and basically said was probably going to finish in the teens. He then says, "You're coming with me, buddy." And they drop back, and he completely forces Chastain up into the outside wall and gets into the back of Ross Chastain. And the biggest reason he said that he decided to do what he did to Ross Chastain is because of what happened at the clash. Now, there was contact at the clash between Denny Hamlin and Ross Chastain. Ross Chastain ran in the back of Denny Hamlin. Now, it's no secret that both these guys have a long history that goes all the way back to the Cup Series race at Gateway, which I attended. At that Gateway race, Ross Chastain got into the back of Denny Hamlin and forced him into the outside wall, and Denny got a lot of damage, and Denny Hamlin started messing with them. Then a little bit later, near the Atlanta Motor Speedway, they had some more contact where Ross Chastain got spun by Denny. Denny Hamlin got spun by Ross Chastain once again, and Denny Hamlin was not happy. Then in New Hampshire, they had a little bit of contact once again. And then at Pocono, there was contact between them where Denny forced Chastain to the outside wall, and Chastain wrecked. Chastain was asked, "Are you going to retaliate against him?" And Chastain really didn't say much. He said, "Fair game." Basically called it fair game. Then at Martinsville later in the season, they had a little bit more contact. And then you saw that Chastain pulled the Hail Melon and beat Denny Hamlin. And then you get to the clash where they had contact once again. So this has been a rivalry that they've been around with. Then Denny Hamlin basically also admits that Ross Chastain has heard Denny Hamlin mention his name on the podcast, and he's not been a big fan of hearing what Denny Hamlin has says. Now, this is something that's very interesting to note, that Denny Hamlin admitted, and you got to give him props for that. But apparently, you probably shouldn't say that you intentionally ran into someone, because NASCAR's SVP of competition, or competition, all that stuff, Elton Sawyer, went on Sirius XM NASCAR Radio, and he says that NASCAR at this moment is currently looking into it, and there could be penalties coming for Denny Hamlin later today. Now, it's unclear what kind of penalties Denny Hamlin could receive. He could receive some pretty big penalties and may not receive as big a penalty at all, because NASCAR did change the wording and change the appeals panel over the offseason as well. Now, personally, in my opinion, I think that Denny Hamlin is probably going to get a penalty. I don't think it's going to be a massive penalty like one of the penalties that's going to be coming later. But I do believe Denny Hamlin is going to be receiving a pretty decent penalty. In my opinion, it's probably going to be a decent-sized fine, probably like a $25,000 fine, and he's probably going to receive a 10-point penalty. I do not expect the penalty to be as massive as what William Byron did initially, because remember, William Byron put him under caution, Denny Hamlin under yellow, while Denny Hamlin got into Chastain under green and forced him into the outside wall, which is a little bit over-aggressive in my opinion. But, and I understand what Denny Hamlin was trying to do, trying to teach a message, and I understand Denny Hamlin, and I completely respect Denny Hamlin for going on the podcast and admitting that what he did was intentional. I got to give him props for that. But I also think it was a little bit stupid because, one, you lost your ton of positions, and then he admits that on the podcast. He said, "Yeah, that was pretty stupid of me. I probably shouldn't have done that, considering the fact that, I cost the team a bunch of positions," and the team was not very happy with Denny Hamlin, apparently, about what he did right there. And in my honest opinion, when it comes to this, I think it's a little stupid when you lose positions. It's also stupid that he probably admitted because of the fact that he's going to lose a bunch of more points now than he probably would have lost. And you just cost Chastain a bunch of positions. I understand why he did it, but maybe it also be a little bit for no reason that he decided to do that. I think that there's a chance Denny Hamlin does get a potential penalty. But going back to this, I just find it a little frustrating. I understand right now that there's at least a truce moment, but Ross Chastain and Denny Hamlin are going to be up front a lot this season. And they're both probably going to get into each other quite a bit. I wouldn't be surprised if there's more contact and this truce ends very quickly because Denny Hamlin and Ross Chastain are two of the fastest cars every week and two of the drivers that are competing every single week. And Chastain had been the points leader at the time and have been up front. And he'd been one of the few drivers that had consistent top 10 finishes, though he didn't finish in the top 10 in Vegas. That being said, though, I think that Denny could have waited a little bit down the road because now Denny Hamlin has a little more of a target on his back, and it just makes you look like, because especially early in the season like this, when it really is no point to do this, there hadn't really been contact during the race. If there had been contact during the race, it would have made a lot more sense. It's one thing, we'll see if NASCAR decides to penalize him, though, but I think it's a little bit too early to be making those moves, and he might have something coming his way in the future. So we'll see what happens going forward, but it's one thing to watch as we get closer to potential penalties being announced for this. As I'm currently editing today's video, NASCAR just laid the hammer and dropped the hammer on Denny Hamlin. They announced today that Denny Hamlin has been issued a massive penalty for his intentional wrecking of Ross Chastain. He's been issued a 25 driver point penalty and a $50,000 fine. I'll be honest and I'll say this when it comes to the big penalty that Denny Hamlin was receiving. I'm not surprised that Denny Hamlin is receiving a penalty. And while Denny Hamlin was running into Ross Chastain quite a bit on the last lap, it was under the green flag conditions. I would not have given him a 25 driver point penalty for that. I understand a $50,000 fine. It makes a lot of sense. I would have given him maybe a 10 driver point penalty. I would not treat this the same as the William Byron situation, what William Byron did last year. Now, Denny could appeal the penalty for sure, but honestly, I'm not surprised or shocked that he's getting a penalty for that. But the fact, and basically he came out and admitted, so you're probably not going to see drivers admit they intentionally wreck somebody so they don't end up getting penalties. But I'm not completely shocked or not surprised Denny Hamlin's getting a penalty, but I think it's a little bit of a massive penalty right there. That's a pretty big penalty, but not as big of the penalty as we're about to talk about right here in a second. But Denny Hamlin hasn't penalized for what he did to Ross Chastain, which isn't a big shock or surprise, but he's been penalized for it. And now we're going to jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we are talking about Hendrick Motorsports and the 31 car for Kaulig Racing. As the biggest penalty for a team in NASCAR history just has been announced. Hendrick Motorsports and the 31 team been handed massive penalties for what happened this past weekend at Phoenix Raceway. For those who are unaware, all 400 cars and the 31 Kaulig cars, Hoovers and Louvers, were confiscated this past weekend and were going to be sent to an R&D center. There have been talk on how unclear the penalties were going to be. Well, NASCAR has laid the hammer down for this. So all the teams have been handed pretty massive penalties where all of them will receive 100 owner point penalties, 100 driver point penalties, and 10 playoff points for all four teams from Hendrick and Kaulig Racing. This means that William Byron no longer has any playoff points, so now he only has 3 playoff points. Kyle Larson is at negative 9 playoff points, and this means that all 4 drivers are below the cutoff line in the playoffs. Now, Chase Elliott's actually, I believe, the highest in the points right now of the Hendrick cars, which is absolutely crazy. Now, why did they get penalized? Well, the big reason, like I mentioned already, is because NASCAR confiscated the louvers. They apparently found a modification with the louvers. Apparently, he modified the parts. And even if it's been a manufacturing issue, and it sounds like it still could have been a manufacturing problem from Hendrick Motorsports, it's still, you're not supposed to modify these parts. It is part of the NASCAR rule. And if you mess with the single source parts that NASCAR hands out to the teams and to the drivers as well, and if they are to modify, you're going to be handed massive penalties. So NASCAR had to play fair. They could not play safe with those rules, even if it was an issue with the manufacturer. This is not the first penalty we've seen, though, with these rules since NASCAR came with these rules last year, and they want everyone to basically be on an equal playing field, and they don't want one team to basically get an advantage where they find a loophole. Last year, we saw multiple teams get affected by this, but not one single major team. Last year, Brad Keselowski and RFK Racing were affected, and Brad Keselowski received 100 driver points and a 100-point penalty. Last year, Michael McDowell also received a very similar penalty, I believe, after Watkins Glen, if I'm not mistaken. And we also saw Kevin Harvick get a 100-point penalty as well in the playoffs as well. And then, of course, you go earlier where we had a 35-point penalty for what happened with Eric Jones. This, like I said, though, is the biggest penalty for an organization in NASCAR Cup Series history. The previous record had been $300,000 for Michael Waltrip Racing when they basically manipulated the playoff system in 2013 and caused what we have now with the current playoff system at this moment for things like this to never happen again. But this is absolutely huge for a lot of reasons because all 4 crew chiefs from Hendrick Motorsports, that being, of course, Blake Harris, Cliff Daniels, Alan Gustafson, and then, of course, Rudy Fugle have all been suspended for the next 4 weeks as well because it's a 4-week suspension for crew chiefs when you're penalized this much. This is absolutely going to affect Hendrick Motorsports in a big, big way that they haven't penalized this. First of all, less playoff points for the team. The fact that they've been handed this big of a penalty is going to affect them there. Second thing, they're not going to have all their crew chiefs there. You're not going to have the strongest crew chiefs there because all 4 of these crew chiefs, in my opinion, are 4 of the best crew chiefs currently in the NASCAR Cup Series right now. And with them not having those 4 crew chiefs around, this is going to be wild. This is the first time I think an organization has had all their crew chiefs gone in a 4-car organization ever, which is absolutely massive and absolutely insane. But I think that NASCAR completely made the right call. In fact, I would have said if they were going to lower a penalty, maybe a 35-point penalty, L1 penalty, but NASCAR has said this many, many times, and I've already mentioned it here, that you are not supposed to modify the next-gen parts. It doesn't matter if it's a manufacturing problem or not. If you modify these next-gen parts, NASCAR is going to come down with the hammer on you. Now, obviously, I do believe, now, question is for a lot of people asking, how does this affect Hendrick Motorsports, and do you think Hendrick Motorsports will be completely screwed? No, I don't believe they're completely screwed here. I still think Hendrick Motorsports is going to be a fast organization. I don't know if they're going to continue their winning ways that they've had all year long. And I know some people were saying that they should confiscate the wins they got, but they shouldn't get their wins confiscated, in my opinion. They should be able to keep their wins, and I would expect that they're going to get to keep their wins. But I would imagine that Hendrick will, at least for a little bit, it's going to struggle, but I don't expect Hendrick Motorsports to be completely screwed. I think Hendrick Motorsports will still have a lot of speed they've had this year. I still think they're going to be very, very competitive, and I think they're still going to win races, maybe during this exhibition. And I also think they're going to get back in the playoffs very, very easily. They've all 4 been fast this year. I think the 9-car will be in good position over points by the end of the year. And I also do believe that William Byron, Alex Bowman, and Kyle Larson, or I believe Larson's about 43 points below the cutoff line or 50 points below the cutoff line. Alex Bowman is about 38 to 40 back, so he's not too far back. And then, of course, William Byron is about, I think, 45 to 50 points back. So they all still can easily get back in. They've been fast this year. They may not be fast completely for the next 2 weeks. They may not be race-winning picks for a lot of people, but I do believe that Hendrick Motorsports will still have the literal pace and speed to go up there and contend. So I'm not too worried about Hendrick Motorsports currently at the moment going to, be competitive. I think they're going to be competitive. I still think they got a chance, but I think this is a fair penalty. You can't have any modifications. I think NASCAR made the right call right here, and I think this is a fair call. I know some Hendrick Motorsports fans are going to disagree with me, and that's perfectly fine and understandable, but in my opinion, you have to go ahead and penalize teams, and you got to be fair. They want them on an equal playing field, and they want it to be fair, and I think this is the right call in NASCAR's part, and I think they made the right decision right here to go to penalize them. I expected these big penalties. They've been handed massive, massive penalties. I thought maybe they'd be a little more lenient, but honestly, I think this is the right call, and I justify NASCAR, and I think they want to go ahead, and they made the right call overall, in my honest opinion. So, that is going to be today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so notified when a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Links description below that, and comment below your thoughts below on today's video. Do you think the penalty for Hendrick Motorsports has been justified or not? Let me know in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about Denny Hamlin receiving penalties and him intentionally getting in the Ross Chastain? Let me know in the comments below. Not sure if I'm going to have another video later today. I had an update video that just released a little earlier. You should probably go check that out. If you've enjoyed the video today, though, and you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. Hope you have earned your subscription so you can tune into more content. We got a lot of content on the way. I've got race picks dropping on the channel tomorrow, and I think you're going to enjoy that. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for some more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.